And we're back for another episode of the Conscious Queries podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you watching us today. So we have very special guests again. We have Graham Killaire and we have Pierre-Paul. So here we are. We're going to be just kind of talking about politics, talking about current events, and we'll see where that takes us. So let's go to Pierre-Paul, and you haven't been on the podcast yet, so why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and what got you interested in international affairs and being an activist for education and being involved in so many things.
Jeez, well, you're setting the bar very high for me right there. Those are tough shoes to fill in. I mean, I can only aspire to become some of those things that you said, of course. I would just like to thank, honestly, the opportunity you're giving me to just join you on this very exciting project. Also with Graham, we've had good discussions before, and it has always been kind of a dream of mine to participate in a kind of creative process like this one and the format of a podcast. I really appreciate the underlying ideas that have motivated you to start this. So it's good to be on here. If I could just say a little bit about myself, just to introduce, just for the sake of the podcast here. Uh, I'm I'm basically just finishing my studies, my bachelor at the University of Ottawa in human rights, and I'm aspiring to maybe continue studying and go maybe do my master's or perhaps go to law school. That would be the logical progression after I finish my studies at the university. So transitioning from human rights into law is just basically kind of logical. It's self-explanatory. So uh, that's kind of my where I'm at right now. I don't want to set like too many big like intentions as to like what I'm planning to achieve, uh, perhaps in the near future or perhaps with this podcast, because I think life can take you to many different ways, and so I would just say right now I'm just willing to experiment, try new things, perhaps develop new opportunities, new ideas, new connections. And this podcast is just seemingly filling up all of those needs. So thanks, Dominic, for having me on board. Right back to you, my friend.
Absolutely. Well, I always appreciate your input and your ideas. You're a really smart guy. You're somebody.
Oh, I love it. Thank you,
Don't
Dominic.
worry about it. You're
Thank you.
definitely
Oh,
somebody who has
I,
good influence.
oh well, honestly, Dominic, I can only send the love back to you, my friend. It's a pleasure to be on here with you, and also Graham. I send my salutations to Graham too. We had a good fun together, and now we can make a little project out of it. So I salute you, gentlemen.
Right.
Well,
Right.
I'm just going to cut in here and say that there's been a little bit too much love going on. It's making me feel slightly uncomfortable. And so I'm just going to interject with a firm dose of neutrality on all previously
Oh,
mentioned topics.
wow, he's just wonderful,
Good.
absolutely. Graham,
Good.
Graham, it's
Graham
just
is he grounds us.
yes, he grounds us, and just so Graham also has big shoes to fill in. Is to yes neutralize the excessive love that has been going around. So Graham, up to you. The incision, coming
We're
in.
not allowed to be happy. Don't you know 2020 is the worst year that's ever existed in the history of the universe? Therefore, no one is allowed to be happy.
Yes, we
Right.
must be miserable. We must embrace nihilism, and yes. So
Anyways,
do not go gentle into the good night, gentlemen.
I believe Pierre-Paul was talking about something rather intriguing right before we had this going,
Oh,
discussing
yes.
some of the effects of, for example, sort of algorithmic based advertising, let's call it.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Okay. I'll go
Right.
with them.
Right before the podcast, we were talking about kind of the the if you've ever seen the Netflix documentary about the social networking and you know what is it, the
Social dilemma.
social dilemma, right? And it really goes into emphasize the fact that we're our platforms are using us and manipulating human behavior and human psychology to the point where engagement and outrage gets more clicks. Therefore, they don't really care about what news they get to you. They care about, making a living. So it ends up being more of a a platform for fear mongering and for, extreme clickbaits, and then it ends up being, what people just assume as fact. It's really amazing to see that people look at mainstream media and look at, whatever's on the news is
Mhm.
immediately assumed to be, the right narrative and the right perspective to have. And
Right,
because we,
right.
we always assume that our journalists are neutral and nonpartisan, and
Here.
they wouldn't lie to us. They wouldn't, fabricate,
The interesting thing there is I find that that's kind of where a lot of this problem comes from. It's not necessarily the belief itself. I believe it's the fact that you have a significant split in the population between people that grew up where the only source of news was essentially professionals that were being held to rather high standards
Mm,
in terms of what they were allowed to publish,
like elites.
versus rapidly we've had not necessarily saying it's bad or good, but we've had this opening up of anybody can have essentially anybody hear what they have to say now.
Oh yeah.
And that is kind of epitomized by some of these social media platforms.
Mm-hmm.
But from my perspective, I think it's more the fact that you'll get one generation, for example, I find the younger generation is extremely critical relatively of the validity of what they read online
Uh-huh.
compared from what used to be more reputable sources, uh, compared to potentially the old generation where, oh, it's in the New York Times, it must be right, it's
Right,
the Times. You know what I mean?
right, right,
and
right.
it's and it's not necessarily just a generational difference, it's the psychological difference as to how you're approaching news. But I
Mhm.
think it's been this transition between this sort of old news versus new news that's kind
Mhm.
of created a bit of a disconnect there for people.
Yeah. Oh, if I can just jump in here, it's so interesting how you just bring here the sort of dichotomy that there is in terms of experience with social media between the older generation and the younger generation. I just recall right there that you were talking about how the older generation, people that grew up, that developed themselves psychologically in the olden days without the internet, you would have thought that them being so used to there not being in the internet, they would come to be more prone to reject the new sort of culture that has come through with internet and social media. So, as you say, the very algorithmic sort of news-based system that we have to distribute knowledge and information. But no, it's actually the opposite around, just as you said. And the older generation somehow are just falling right through those sort of algorithms that are in place. So I think that's a very important distinction right there, and I'm pretty sure you were thinking the same thing right there, Graham, weren't you?
Yeah, that's sort of where I was going. It's that whole you kind of see the meme, your parents tell you not to trust people on the internet, and then your parents end up trusting people on the internet for their news.
Right.
And it's you see it periodically being talked about, but that's kind of the almost flipped perspective that you're starting to see in certain cases compared
Mhm.
to almost traditionally how things would be looked at.
Right. It's almost like a paradox that people are ending up behaving in ways that we completely unexpected. And also now there's the older generation completely misjudge how they would develop and adapt to the current circumstances. We didn't expect the young to fare too well, considering they would have been maybe addicted through the more primary psychological developmental stages that they go through, and especially during the teenage years when they're very important kind of struggles that happen psychologically to create social bonds, to create social identity, role crises. Those occurred throughout teenagehood, and they grew up, the younger generation, uh, from a young age with social media. I mean, just from myself, speaking perhaps on behalf of my generation, uh, I remember using Facebook very much since I was in about sixth grade. Like we're talking elementary school almost. Like it was
Yeah,
becoming a thing. So
yeah.
it's like
I remember
it
first
was
getting the
there.
internet, I think in the third grade. And then, yeah, I think Facebook for me, I was a little late. I adapted it, I think, early grade seven for me.
Mm, mm,
But I
mm.
know it was quite popular before that. So grade six,
Yeah,
seven sounds about like we were in the same range there.
yeah, and like there was MySpace before Facebook too. That's true. So it was already like it was settled in terms of culture at least.
Yeah.
And it was just kind of entering our lives, and I remember there being a little bit of a stigma, like maybe you shouldn't have that from like a young age, but it's like everybody's doing it, and just get on there, and next thing you knew, like as soon as you got into high school, everybody was on social media. There was like the physical social sphere at school, like localizing the institution, but then we created a whole other social paradigm uh, on the internet. One that is, for the worst case, virtual, and for the better, innovative. You know, so there's a lot of controversy around the subject, and so I think that has been a good subject to start it off with. It's definitely creating a lot of room for discussion. So, and we still have yet to hear about what Dom is thinking on
Well,
this subject either. So it's honestly it's a great start, gentlemen.
well, I mean, you raise a really good point where, before, if there was bullying at school, at least you had the luxury of going home and not having to deal with it anymore until the next day. But now it's to the point where you can get bullied at school and at home on the internet, and especially on the internet when you have the anonymous nature of it, when you're just typing on a keyboard instead of talking to a human being, there's a lot less civility, so people say very, very nasty things online. So it's
Mhm.
kind of like it's shown parts of human nature that before when there were discussions, you would just whisper to your friend and chuckle about something. Now you just tweet it and then make everybody feel uncomfortable, and essentially it's not a good, sometimes it's better to say less, sometimes it's better to you know it's sometimes it's better to say nothing. And this is kind of like an old Japanese fortune where they would say, if you have, it kind of goes back to, if you got nothing good to say, don't say anything at all, because
Mm.
they're human beings are prone to say very, very stupid things all the time, because
Right.
I mean, our brains constantly are working. From the moment we're born, we're constantly flooding our brain idea after idea. So we're constantly, well, I mean, not maybe not everybody. Some people breathe with the mouths open, so I don't know what they're thinking about all day. But
Yeah.
I don't know. Must be interesting.
Well, as for the mouth breathers, I would usually assume they'd be thinking about the cold they have that's stuffed up their nose. Uh,
Yeah,
I know
that's
that's
always
usually my reason, but
that's always that's fair.
but going back to what you were saying, are you insinuating that passive aggressively subtweeting my way out of my problems isn't the correct solution?
Yeah, no, it's not. I mean,
But
it's fun to joke around. I mean, I follow a lot of comedians on Twitter, and they're pretty funny. They come up with really funny stuff. But like, you know, when we get politicians tweeting, it's just it only gets it's only going to be bad. It's not going to be good. There's
yeah,
a time and place and a forum for every kind of discussion and dialogue. And political issues isn't 400 80 character tweets. It's
right,
not.
right, right.
You leave it to Bernie Sanders to filibuster for 12 hours. Just leave it to him. Okay, not you know.
But it was very interesting what you were just talking about regarding how the internet could, if I could just use the word, apologize, it apologizes the institution even more. So it just, I feel that kind of as you said, just people being able to say whatever they think on the internet, and they can hide behind the sort of internet persona. So They can say anything, but not be held accountable for it. At least not within the social sphere from which they are saying those things. So it it's one thing. It increases whatever is kind of going on in the school. If the school is there's a bullying, well then the bullying is going to be carried out online. If the school, whatever sort of other problem the school could have at the level of the organization of the institution, somehow the internet is going to make it worse. So I feel like the question suddenly comes about to be human nature. Are we just innately born, kind of like you say, we're born to say stupid things? Are we born to be evil? And there's a big question about, are human beings good or evil? And then there's a whole, we can start talking about the original sin. Maybe we did the one sin that we shouldn't have done. We perhaps wanted absolute knowledge. For all I care, I don't know. But we there's something that could be, of course, kind of problematic about our own nature that we might be repressing. Perhaps if we were to speak in the language of Freud or Jung, perhaps we have a subconscious that is filled with a lot of dark material that if we say we repress too much and we ignore too much, if we ignore too much our own nature and what lies underneath, it could come to destroy us. And so it's kind of necessary to always have balances in check. Kind of like as we see perhaps in certain organization or constitutions. They're the check and balances. We must kind of account for a tendency in humans to make mistakes, be pathological, die, become ill. I don't know. The debate goes on, but it's kind of interesting to see that if we apply, for example, this reasoning to the political institutions that are at play, and we see how, for example, politicians could distort the discourse in a way that it would make it poorer. If you just look at the discourse level in the United States, we went from Barack Obama. I mean, you have to look at Barack Obama and understand where he comes from. He's a scholar. He taught constitutional law in university. He was a diplomat. He was well spoken, and there was a lot. The discourse, at least the public level discourse, was much higher. And then the Republicans then came, and they kind of came up with the argument that the Democrats, they were just running sort of a deep state, as they would call it. They were running a very complex, kind of very highly punctualized and constructed system, and they were kind of hiding and exploiting the American people under that sort of deep state. And they just completely rejected their mainstream media, and now the discourse is down like to potato levels. We're hearing about potatoes. This is just potatoes. It's QAnon. It doesn't make sense. I mean, soon all of a sudden we're going to have the flat earthers coming out and dismantling the Constitution. I don't know what's going to happen next, but it's all up for grabs. But the point is, what has happened? What has happened with social media?
I think it's a little bit simpler than that. I think it's just, if you think about who was involved in the political discourse under Barack Obama, who did he engage? He engaged a certain demographic, a demographic that resonated with his eloquence. On the other side of the coin, we've been hearing about how there's the issue of like that texting, that Twitter culture of just boil it down to 120 characters. Who cares about the spelling or the eloquence? Just get the point across. The Republicans tapped into a whole new demographic. I don't think that it was necessarily that anything particularly changed. It was just so much as everybody was like, wait a minute, what if we just talked to all these people over here? And I really think that's what's reflected in the fact that, for example, the poll numbers massively showed Hillary dominating Donald Trump. Well, yes, in the people that were engaged under Obama and previous administrations, I'm sure she would have won. But that's not who they were engaging with. That's why those polls didn't make sense. That's where this massive group of people appeared from. They were there all along. They just felt unaccepted by the current regime, and I think that also contributes to their loyalty to the one that has actually addressed what they feel is them directly.
Well,
So
when you look at the demographics on Twitter, and we look at, how many Canadians and how many Americans are on it, this is in Canada, this year it's 7.6 million accounts are Canadian, and then from that, there's only maybe 12 to 15% that are active daily. And then in America, we have out of 300 million, we have 36 million daily users on Twitter. So we're being, this echo chamber is kind of trying to decide the political discourse when they represent a fringe minority that they have made themselves think that they have become the voice of the people on Twitter. This is what it
right.
has become.
And I mean, at the same time, although perhaps it's not the highest number of people that is there relatively to the entire population, which is, if I'm not mistaken, 37 or 38 million at this point. But we also must not underestimate how all the individual users, then when they go and meet other people or interact with other people in other institutions, uh, we cannot underestimate how they will have a kind of domino effect on influencing other people. Those people, they might be leaders. They might just be somebody that is very criminally involved in some illegal gangs, and he just kind of starts to push forward a little narrative that kind of like the small rush of the wind can lead to like the tornado. Perhaps just that is creating enough like incels, or it's creating little groups or echo chambers, I would like to call them, and it only suffices to be there to be 20, 30 people, very intelligent people that are very well versed in analytics, well versed perhaps in linguistics, that they're able to kind of categorize all of the metrics that they need in order to develop this new demographic that they'll be able to reach, influence, and magically sometime with just three word buzzwords or one liners, they lock her up, crooked Hillary, MAGA, make America great again. It's like the discourse has gone. It's so simple, but no, but just by using those metrics and all this data, they were able to unlock those new demographics just with as simple as putting the magical words together and just cast the spells, and boom, there you go, steal an election. Russia was interfering. It's just we don't even know what happened there 2016, and then we don't know what's happening now because
But I
it's
mean,
under like
putting words to your campaign, that's all. That's always the classic move. If you want to gain legitimacy or if you want to win, you have to use buzzwords to get there.
yeah,
That's classic marketing.
it's classic. And what's also interesting, let's say we really go back to like classic marketing. We go back to the original mastermind of marketing, Edward Bernays, the nephew of Freud, when he first collaborated with a company, which I'm tempting to say it's the Lucky, what's the Lucky Smokes, or I can't remember what's the name of the company, but he cooperated with a company to create the marketing campaign that would ultimately lead to half of the population or half of their consumers or potential consumers, the women, to start consuming cigarettes. So they were trying to make it essentially to rewrite the culture just so that it would become acceptable for women to start to smoke. So the once again the shoes were pretty big to fill on this one, but Freud's nephew comes in with a pretty powerful knowledge. He's the nephew of Freud, and well, she's just going to apply psychoanalysis and develop a powerful kind of medium through which he'll be able to convey a message. He didn't. He saw that the woman smoking would kind of be a symbolic manifestation of a. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it would kind of be a symbolic protest to the patriarchic order because it was only men who smoked. And then he was like, if women smoke and they do that thing that's only for men, then they're going to kind of protest the hierarchy or something like that. I don't know. Like you have to understand, it was Freud's nephew. Like, he was deep into this, so he kind of laid it all out for this company. They pulled a little stunt. I think it was at an anniversary. There was a parade. They lined up a bunch of very attractive women for there to be right in front of the parade as it passed or something like that, and just suddenly light up smokes and then start taking pictures, and it created like a whole media movement, and everybody caught on to that, and then it was like those hot women are like smoking, and it's now like extremely cool to smoke. All of a sudden, overnight, you double your demand or your consumer population of your product, just like that. Just simple, basic psychology. So we say classic, but it goes pretty deep, and people are not aware of that. It's like it's classic, but it can't be underestimated. It's still very powerful, and simply because the people are not educated on psychology, they don't understand how the mind can work and how you can be subconsciously influenced in order to the point of toppling elections or governments or whatever. Cambridge Analytica, you see what they've done. They literally toppled governments. They were able to interfere in the elections. A conservative number, like 20, 25 countries, maybe up to 30. We could look it up. We could look at the statistics. But hey, when you can interfere with like little magic words like that in 30 different countries, that's something. That's quite something. It's classic, but it can't be understated.
Wow. I mean, it's unbelievable to, think of, it really becomes a manipulation game, and it's if there's money to be made or power to be exercised, people will the power vacuum exists, and you just underline that it's a very real phenomenon that human beings are constantly out to influence each other, or and it's kind of an interesting phenomenon for even human beings. How do we think of human beings that become famous, right? Like how do people ultimately gain attention from so many people at the same time, over an event or over some movie or some phenomenon that made them a meme, right? How does somebody become a
it's
meme?
almost that you're famous for being famous type characters. Like, for example,
Almost.
the Kardashians that became famous from, wasn't their father O.J. Simpson's lawyer or something like that?
Yes.
Like, just very tangential fame to begin with, but they've developed enormous,
Right.
incredible brands nowadays.
Right.
But it's just interesting how these things, how strange events can spark off these almost media dynasties, if you want to call them that.
And it's so random. It's random, but it's also chance. It's so difficult. Like, I mean, if there's no one book that says how to attain fame and in one certain way, right? Think of Tom Green, right? A guy from the suburbs of Ottawa becomes a famous comedian, famous podcasters on MTV. Now he's touring America. He's making a bunch of money. How do you get there from just being a kid in the suburbs? It's amazing how you can just, depending on what kind of talent you're doing, what kind of, brand you want, it's really interesting how, somebody can gain that so much influence over so little time. And, it becomes almost so much responsibility for those people that, before, a producers of a TV show, they would vet people to make sure that they wouldn't go crazy with the fame. But now there's kind of there's none of those producer filters. So, anybody with a camera can start a podcast or start a YouTube channel, and, they can become famous overnight, and, it's kind of a democratization, but at the same time, it kind of opens the can of worms to, like unvetted entertainers or unvetted people, where they might say inappropriate things, or they might not be trained to, not dox people or not like do inappropriate things that you would obviously not do. So like, obviously it's kind of like journalism as well, where before journalists would have to be trained, they would have to have an education, to be a professional journalist. Now anybody with a camera is on the street and saying, "Oh, look, we're in a protest. Look, I'm a journalist."
1 million protests, bro.
Are you a journalist? You're
Mm.
just somebody in the street. But I mean,
Yeah.
and that's kind of like the ethical standards of journalists kind of went out the door, and that's kind of why modern journalism is in such a shaky position where even I heard news that CNN was you know at the breaking point where they're trying to the company that owns it is trying to sell it off because it's not profitable anymore.
Are you
And
kidding
I
me?
mean, it's
Well,
like
Who owns
it
the old
it
model doesn't work anymore.
well, it's pretty simple. When's the last time any of you have paid for news?
it? Yeah, yeah, never.
I can't
Yeah,
even
no.
think of the last time I've paid for news, but I consume it every day.
Right.
Mm.
So how's it getting paid for? Ads, obviously.
And
Now you have to look at obviously traditional ad sources were television, standard television channels, which for years have been declining. You get stations like Fox News that are known famously for having a relatively old standard audience, but obviously their reach in other platforms is much farther. But
Mm.
it's just it's the fact that you only way that you can essentially pay for news now is to be popular and get the most people viewing your ads.
Mm.
Uh, versus in the past, it was almost all you had to do was have enough viewers that people would bother to pay to put ads on there.
Right.
Yeah,
It's almost the never-ending push for more clicks
right,
that
right.
didn't really exist in the past.
It did not. And now it's in. Well, you can kind of imagine how just like say accumulation of capital uh, might, and also the control over the means over the on the modes of production over the means of production, if we were to speak in more Marxist terms, well, it creates situations of relationships of powers between social classes, but in the same way that the capital would normally do that in say past economies, well, now the same thing happens with the sort of click economy, like the the advertisement economy, and how much countries can have the monopoly over the advertisement. And at this point, it's really spooky. It's like Google. Google is just like the advertisement monopoly. And there's like they don't really care, like, and Facebook too, and YouTube, and that's pretty much like what's going on. Like everybody's just being almost controlled by those big monopolies, and we can't underestimate the power that those advertisement can have. And I mean, Dom, you were just talking earlier, kind of we were asking ourselves, is there a science and how those people can suddenly go up almost like the social ladder in terms of fame, and they become like almost like icons, or yeah, sometimes like pseudo intellectuals, they suddenly become like public intellectuals, and
At least
it,
public figures.
yeah, at least public figures. And but people just become suddenly in a position of power. That's the simple point. They have the spotlight, and then whatever they say, it trickles down and ripples down through like many social spheres for like a brief moment. And we're tempted to ask ourselves, is there a science that allows people to do that? And if there is a science, who owns the knowledge, who controls the knowledge, who disseminates the knowledge of such a science? And arguably, to a certain extent, your guess can be as good as mine, but there seems to be a lot of evidence that shows that there is indeed a science. It's based in psychology, psychiatry. It's based in AI. It's based in algorithms, matrices. It's a whole complex system of various knowledge, and it's absolutely unfathomable the power that they generate. And I mean, if we're to talk about power, energy, I'm sure Graham, you would know a little bit about that, but it changes the amount of the power you can do from analyzing so much data that you pulled out, all the metrics, all the recently visited places, chat logs, what else, like videos, the attention span you show certain ads, and then you develop other sort of metrics. It's unfathomable how far you can go with mathematics, especially how far mathematics have gone.
The interesting thing that I think is also worth pointing out is, though we've come a long way with these sorts of things, you do still see that, for example, you get some very popular examples that crop up with the YouTube algorithm that is famously discussed and ever changing. And I think if we really want to kind of have almost a working example of kind of what you're talking about, you can kind of look at how people have tried to understand the YouTube algorithm over the years. Because if you want essentially a microcosm of society, you can kind of look at the YouTube environment. Though obviously it's extreme, it's an interesting example, and we're literally looking at the algorithm that controls what becomes trending or not, so to speak.
Right.
And you see that sometimes it does break down. Like, for example, there's periods where you'll get there was the famous one that started cropping up of how children were being recommended these strange, almost pseudo-pornographic versions of things happening with people dressed up in cartoon outfits and stuff. And it was becoming this big thing where ad companies who were having their ads put on these videos and then advertised to often underage children led to massive pulling out of advertisers from YouTube, and it was part of the big adpocalypse that happened a year or so ago. One of them, there's been several. But it's just, you get this interesting time where you do sometimes see that the algorithm, though it's getting better, though we're getting more accurate with our scientific models for what people should and want to see, we are still, it's an AI, and sometimes it learns wrong, so to speak. And it does lead to these sort of interesting outliers, you could call them.
Right.
But they're also, I think it's also important to point out that they're human inventions, right? This is code that was written by people like you and me, so they're just as susceptible to being, perhaps biased, or perhaps, written in a way that forms them into the reality that
But
the
one thing you
programmer
have to
makes.
remember is the algorithm isn't what it was programmed to do anymore. The algorithm, YouTube doesn't directly control it. It's an AI.
Right.
What it does is it was told, keep people on this website for absolutely as long as you possibly can, and do everything to show them as many ads as possible while they are here.
Basically,
That's its goal. That's all it's told to do.
pretty much.
And everything that happens, every video that gets promoted or not, the algorithm looks at, okay, well, if the person goes to this video and then they go to another YouTube video, that's good. If they go to this video and then they stop halfway and close YouTube, bad. Get rid of that video. Don't advertise that video. People are leaving the platform. Get rid of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, that person. Oh, he's getting linked from other people. He's linking to other people. Oh, look at this. It's a whole network. Oh, maybe this person will start a fight with this person, and then this person will come in and comment on it. And then you'll get this giant loop of views going in circles between the different channels. The algorithm eats it up.
So it fuels drama. It likes drama.
In a way, drama channels realized that they can use this. And so drama channels, you see a lot of it where you get the argument, is the drama real, or are they making it up to keep the views going in circles? Why do they keep
It's pretty meta, bro. It's pretty meta.
The invisible hand prophecy became true finally. It's like there's the invisible hand dictating things and stuff, and little messages here and that, and more of that. No, not too much of this, and there you go. The profits are the most efficiently distributed and they're optimized. And thank you very much. That's the AI invisible hand trademark.
But yeah, honestly, I find the YouTube algorithm is it's an incredibly interesting topic to me. Everything I've heard about it is it seems to kind of do, like I said, do its own thing. Like YouTube will periodically try, they can manually, apparently they don't directly say it, but supposedly they can manually detrend videos and stuff like that. But
I don't doubt it. terminate accounts, whatever.
I
They're
mean, they've banned
arbitrary.
people on
Yeah,
multiple
but at the
occasions,
same
right?
time, it's just
For
interesting
political
is that
reasons.
the algorithm's, like I said, not fully under their control at this point. They've given it a goal, and they kind of tweak around the edges, but the algorithm does do its own thing to some extent.
Oh, yeah.
So it kind of leads to this almost we're fueling our own problems because it's like, oh, well, they want to see problems. I will encourage problems.
Because it's learning
so
from
to
human
speak.
behavior, right?
You know what I mean?
That's
It's
interesting.
like, if it's drama they want, it's drama I'll give them. You know what I mean? It's.
Hey, but speaking of this drama, I mean, and we were referencing just earlier about the social dilemma. It showed in the movie, but also just in a lot of research way before that. And if it was in research, it was straight up executives from certain companies that either left the company or came out and they blew the whistle, and they said, okay, those technologies, they're actually invented or organized and orchestrated so that they increase drama, they increase conflict, competition, and people were basically sounding red flags in that they were afraid for the mental health and to the social organization of our country. No, nothing of small importance. I mean, we look at the father of sociology, Emile Durkheim. He talked a lot about the process which he called anime, which is the deterioration of social bonds and of rulelessness. And if that happens, and we start to just kind of destroy the fabric of society, I'm using the words of a former executive at Facebook. There are very, very important problems and ramifications for mental health, security, cohesion, political discourse, due process rights, and then after that, it becomes a little bit of a shaky road. It's quite something, and it's interesting. I fully agree that it's interesting, and it's also scary. And I think we have to give a fair share of attention to that. It at least should be part of the discussion. But unfortunately, for about 80 million people, the discussion level is not going any further than QAnon. So that's on the tip of the hat for me in that case. And we just hope that eventually we'll be able to tame this technology and the power that it presents, in order at least to respect human rights and ensure a certain level of civility, if not the entire collapse of our Western civilization.
Yeah, it's pretty worrisome to think that our own technology can be our demise, right? Well, I mean, that would be no surprise to Graham. Graham can talk to us about nuclear physics all day.
Our technology has been able to blow us up since the 40s.
Right,
Since
well,
earlier, we could have
exactly.
chemical bombed ourselves out of existence probably since the early 1900s.
But now it's
We're
not
still
even a
technically
bomb. It's a
geoengineering
social
ourselves
bomb. It's an online virtual bomb.
Oh no, but you're absolutely right. I mean, the greatest national security threat is actually pretty much that. It's the online, full-blown psychological meltdown into psychosis, delusion,
Right.
paranoia, and after that, once they have lost touch with reality, uh, the sky's the limit, my friends. And if we reach that, I fully accept the analogy of the bomb. It will be a psychological bomb, and I don't understand how our institutions would be able to survive that.
One of the things that kind of emerged in the post-Cold War world was this. Well, it didn't emerge. It obviously existed during the Cold War because there was and before that because propaganda, etc. But you see that a lot of countries kind of realized that going to war with each other in modern weapons context can't work. If any major nation went to war, real war with another major nation now, there wouldn't be a world left. We'd all be dead. We've been more than capable of doing that for a long time now. And so we've had to realize, well, if we can't fight with weapons, how else do we fight? then we started going to proxy wars and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
then we realized, well, you know what's even cheaper than weapons? Just fire up a computer and go text somebody across the internet.
Oh, I mean, topple a couple of elections if you're lucky.
Yeah, it's like it's the cheapest way of essentially running aggressive interference in another country's affairs.
So cheap, so efficient.
Think of
so
all the DDoS attacks and the cyber attacks from China that go onto our servers. That's
And the
real.
other thing that you have to take into account is it's extremely cheap to attack with and extremely expensive to defend against. Very similar to a nuclear bomb in that way, where, well, at least ICBMs, for example, where once they're fired, it's extremely difficult to shoot one down. Essentially, it's gonna land. It's just a matter of when and how much damage it will do.
right.
You can, of course, have certain defenses against it, but you'll probably never be able to get them all. It's very similar to, for example, a DDoS attack. You could hit 20 different places at once. Okay, you might not get 18 of them. Chances are two of them might have a weaker network. You know what I mean? It's and just in terms of being able to cope with digital defenses. From what I gather, it's not easy to be able to defeat every new virus, right? Every new type of spyware. It's constantly trying to predict people's creativity, so to speak.
Mm. Mm. That's it's problematic. That's it's way too much, way too much. I mean, the DDoS attack is a good analogy. I mean, I like to look at just like the DDoS attack and say the scope of like psychology. Like your subconscious is basically doing a DDoS attack on you all the time. It's like, oh, you're just going there. I don't know. Here's a little ad. Write music, write image, and then you get a certain memory from your subconscious childhood, and then all of a sudden you're like just being DDoS attacked by your emotions. And they can do that with the DDoS attacks. It's not anymore the big military. It's not the big guns like you said. It's now it's the proxy wars, but then it's this new type of war, and it's just the DDoS attack of the social media, and it's a real thing.
And it's to the point where a DDoS attack can be targeted to a certain platform. Let's say an Asian government doesn't like a certain the really good YouTube channel, China Uncensored, that talks about kind of China's totalitarianism and their political problems. And then obviously, because they're very critical of China's government, they're constantly being DDoS attacked by Chinese servers. And so they're constantly, to the point where if they want anybody to watch their videos or go to their website, they have to pay more and more and more money to get more servers, to pay more people to get more servers, so that there's actually room to host, even though they're constantly being attacked. So we're back into the trenches, but now it's cyber trenches, right?
Mm.
Create
It's
more.
but I like that. I like that analogy. We are kind of transitioning into a new state of warfare. Could talk about psychological warfare. The term is not unfamiliar. And one thing that is kind of interesting to make as a distinction in terms of battlefield, uh, it's it's unregulated. There's no conventions on the psychological warfare. It's because it's so kind of deeply entrenched in the propaganda machine. It's kind of just a given, just kind of like how advertising is just so deeply entrenched in capitalism. It's just a given. Yeah, you just do the little psychological manipulation, and it's hopefully increase the profits. And the thing is, it needs to be regulated. There should be conventions, but doing those conventions, I'm pretty sure it would just cause the implosion of the political class, because the whole kind of political class relies either directly or indirectly, depending on the people, the politicians, and the institutions, They rely on the psychological sort of manipulation. It's the game of power.
this
Power
is
is very
absolutely
psychological.
yeah, this is something I actually mentioned with Dom another time was that it's also you can't necessarily create a treaty on regulating it per se because a lot of it is done by private citizens. Like for example, you
Yeah.
always hear the term Russian trolls, Russian bots.
Mhm.
Not all of those people are just government employees sitting in a lab like we're gonna create the ultimate anti-capitalist meme today. A lot of it is just people on the internet that are like, hey, America's having a rough time. Let's throw wood on that dumpster fire.
Yeah,
Here's some stuff. You should do this.
yeah,
You should
right.
do that. And it's kind of you see like with internet polls that get taken over by some random result, for example. That's not organized by any government. It's almost mob mentality of once one person starts doing it, you can start to
Oh yeah.
convince more people that it almost creates it's not in the government's hands anymore. They could just send one joke and
Right.
then suddenly one person finds it's funny and it blows up and then they don't have to do anything. It just
Yeah.
became the meme. You know what I mean?
Right. No, no, no. I get it. Uh,
It's self-propagating, I guess is the word that I was looking for to
yeah. It gets a life of its own. It takes a life of its own at one point, and I think that's the thing that's kind of scary. It just shows how little control we basically have over it. It's like, and we don't even know if like this machine is stoppable at this point. Like, yeah, can we stop? Can we stop the sort of self propagation? Like, it's very hard to define.
it's more like a virus than a war.
Yeah.
It's once it's released, it spreads on its own.
Mm, yeah. And in the world of poor education and what has been discussed as the dumbing down of America, um, the full-fledged attack on the education system just makes it such that people don't know how to recognize the virus. I mean, look, if we're just to make like a sloppy like reference to just the coronavirus, people out there are just unaware of what a virus is. Like they think that it's an attack on on their freedom and their liberties, and that we're just trying to control them and put a mask on. But no, this is just actually what has to happen. The pandemic, in past pandemics, they've done it. That's
Yeah.
how.
Well, I think
We're gonna
the
do it now.
point is yes, it is an attack on your freedom and liberty from
Yeah,
the virus, and
exactly.
we're doing this to try to protect your freedom and liberty.
That's right. So imagine if you started to literally like crack down on those self-propagating like meme elitists, however you want to call them, or the bad ones. Then you start, okay, well, what's a like good meme, what's a bad meme? It's gonna become kind of shady, and that
Well,
it's gonna be freedom of expression, of course,
un-
freedom of expression, freedom to information, but it's like the world is burning down here. And we gotta
one interesting point that I would also like to bring up is even, for example, memes themselves. If you want to talk about this, like for example, on for example, I know Reddit. I know there's other websites, for example, but for example, you'll have a Reddit uh, subreddit, and they will have moderators on them. So in theory, you do have a sort of gateway of people that allow them to be posted or not.
Mhm.
So even on forums that might be considered open and everyone can post in, that's not necessarily true. You are still seeing a filtered presentation of what the total submissions were. And I find that sometimes that kind of gets forgotten about on the internet at
Moderators.
times, is that even content that might seem open forum is more moderated than we like to give it credit for.
Hmm. I mean, I think that's kind of very easily observable in YouTube, for example. Like they disable the comments, and it's like, what kind of effect does that have on the viewer once he sees the video, or how are influence people? How are they influenced, or how much are they influenced with the comments or stuff like that? But there is a lot of moderation, and Reddit is a good example. I use Reddit quite a lot, and it's quite something to see how from subreddit to subreddit, it's a whole different kind of almost a different. It has a different community, of course, different subject or different interests, but the sort of moral or the ethical ethos that you might find within each subreddit is, in my opinion, kind of similarly to what you argue for. I think it's all different across the various subreddits purely because of the moderators and also the culture that has been developed by the community.
Obviously, in smaller subreddits, you tend to get, I would say, more free form, obviously. But when you start to get to some of the larger ones, you end up getting sometimes certain moderators that can be accepting and rejecting massive quantities of posts, and it's interesting to see how you can almost get this scaling influence based on the size of the subreddit, for example, as to how powerful your moderators might be.
It's the same thing with Twitch channels and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It could be a channel with 10 viewers or 10,000, and yeah, obviously having more moderators, doing those things definitely helps, and it kind of like it makes for a filter. You're right, and it's
Right.
it's part of the. I guess it depends what we characterize those mediums and those forums as, right? Like, is it a presentation where obviously I want to make sure that nobody's swearing in the comments, so like that's like a fair way to filter it with moderators. I mean, it seems like a
Right.
a good tool to have, to have human interaction instead of just being the computer doing everything.
Right. Then I guess it comes down to the question is, those moderators, should they be democratically elected, or
should moderators be elected? That's interesting.
So, but I mean, look, I mean, if we're to talk, if we're to talk about the whole disinformation and political manipulation, all that, well, the enablers, the self-propagating dictators of the.
I mean, do we elect referees in sports? I mean,
I imagine
they're just
probably
tired.
the best comparison that we can run here is essentially these are your editors of media forums.
Right.
Who edits the evening news? Who picks what goes on air?
Yeah.
There ends up being the senior editor at the newspaper. That's who your moderators are.
Yeah.
It's basically just your senior editor of whatever the page is.
So it's not.
So at the
it's
same
not
time,
a social
whenever
platform.
We go, oh well, that newspaper has a bias. That blah 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 has a bias. We have to remember that we should be applying that same logic to our online forums,
because it's
which
a
I
publication.
find a lot of people don't.
Right.
Yeah, is that moderators can apply a bias onto something, and it's almost an invisible bias because it's not what you're seeing, it's what you're not seeing. You know what I mean? Especially when it comes to, for example, comment sections where people might go there to kind of judge people's opinions on something. Well, what happens if you only show certain opinions of something? Then people that come to look at that only get the one opinion of something.
That's right. And that's like the whole story of like the news media being biased, and how many of the news channels are owned by the conservatives, how many of the news channels are owned by the liberals, and how much are they fueling the divide that we see today in the United States of America, and to a certain degree here in Canada, we're seeing the erosions of almost the political class. It's people are losing faith in the political institutions and the political actors. And there's a big distrust. And we've already talked about the 90 million or the 80 million in the United States of America. And we just must hope that for us in Canada, it's not going to play out the same way, to say the least. That would be an understatement.
Right. It's kind of a scary situation that it's become. So we'll have to keep an eye on it. I kind of want to go back into the changing world of the education and post-secondary and the institutions on education, as maybe in Canada and more because we've all studied in Canada and not in the United States, so it's kind of hard to talk about the United States situation. But Pierre-Paul, what do you have to say about the new approach to how everything's online, how everything is done remotely.
Right.
What do you think? Is this a good move or is this the wrong move?
Right. Well, I mean, look, as far as the remoteness element to the education system right now, we obviously have to attribute that to the arrival of COVID-19, the novel virus. It would have been unthinkable for there to be such a leap, such a transformation in the way that we perform education, in the way that it has happened without a virus, without COVID-19, without a drastic kind of change of circumstances that forces you to completely change the culture surrounding education. But if I could make a commentary on the effects that this change has had, well, I think that there are certain problems at play. Here are some of the problems I see. Uh, I definitely recognize that by using a new medium of communication, say for example Zoom, as it is famously used now, I think that ultimately the way that the knowledge will be distributed and disseminated through that medium, it will happen differently, and people, individual students, they'll react differently when they deal with those new technologies. When they say, for example, the access to the teacher. Maybe let's say that we talk about the problem of there being too many students for a teacher. So the student doesn't have too many, like the individual student doesn't have too much teacher to student time. Maybe with those technologies in places, the measures in place, with the amount of people that you can have on Zoom at the same time. I don't know how they're doing it at university right now, because I decided not to continue studying with COVID-19. I have one semester left, but I'm out. So I don't know how like the classes are distributed and all that. I've heard they're starting catching on, but I have absolutely no doubt that the quality of the education has gone down a little bit. How much of it is just due to the fact that they had to adapt in order to kind of come to terms with the new circumstances of COVID-19? And then the other question, the like very multi-million dollar question, if we will, for the whole education system is the model, the current, or let's say for the sake, the past model, is it transferable? Is it translatable to the new medium through which it is conferred, the curriculums? And the most problematic question, I say, is should students be paying the same amount of money for that? Because wait, we're talking about university students that are getting in debt for a future that they're not guaranteed to find favorable conditions of life with the climate crisis and the systemic collapse that is seemingly upon us. And there, you're not going to get the same quality of education. Like if it's a big drop in quality, and if your fundamental human rights in terms of education, such as it is guaranteed, say for example, for the children under the Convention of the Rights of the Child, which Canada has ratified, and in that convention, it says that the education system for the youth, for the young, should be dedicated to the full development of the mental and physical capacities. Well, I see a problem right then and there. When you're only on Zoom, how much can you engage, say, the physical capacities of the young? That's just one example. But then you can start to think, what about the mental capacities? What do you guys think about that?
I got a few things here. First of all, I know at least in most places, elementary and high school is still mostly being done in person with only minor Zoom components. So, in terms of the youth part, the youth are all covered under that. The only programs that have really got full Zoom is university, which no longer qualifies under youth. That's older. Second of all, one problem with lowering tuition fees at universities is, though I agree potential drops in quality have occurred, you've also seen absolutely no drop in cost for the university. They haven't lost any costs. Everything basically is still where it is. They have to have the same amount of staff. They have to do the same amount of work, pay the same amounts of people. research universities are still paying the same researchers to do the same research.
Mhm.
So though I agree that intuitively I don't feel like I want to pay the same amount for a lower quality, but having gone through the numbers more in my head, I'm like, at least in the short term, the universities are going to need some time to slowly adapt themselves to perhaps having larger class sizes
Right.
in order to cut down on that kind of stuff.
Right.
Because in the current model, they're essentially giving the same amount of profs, the same amount of class hours, with the same amount of students and the same amount of TAs.
Right.
It's just instead of sitting in a classroom, you're
That's
at
right.
home, which
That's right.
you get issues with stuff like, for example, I'm TAing a lab course right now. Labs don't transfer well to not doing the lab. You
Right.
have to have hands-on for that.
Right.
Versus there's certain classes I've taken where I don't think there's been any difference whatsoever between my experience
Mhm.
in doing a, I'm going to say, PhD level course online versus in person.
Right.
I
Right.
would say that it even was easier in the sense that I didn't have to take transit into the university to go to a 1.5 hour lecture to then go home again.
Mhm.
So if
Yeah.
anything, it might have saved me time.
There
So
are some.
basically what I'm trying to say is I think the discussion has to really focus on how it affects individual types of courses at individual levels.
Right.
Because there is a significant amount of variance between, for example, like I said, doing a like chemistry lab where you're mixing chemicals. Well, how do you know what chemicals, like you can't practice mixing chemicals safely if you're not physically there doing it. Like of course you can learn the theory behind it, but unless you physically do it, you're not physically doing it. The same with, I imagine, a lot of college courses where there's a lot of hands-on work, like anything woodworking, plumbing, electricians, any of that kind of stuff. Like you can't just not do it. You have to do it. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, I
Versus
think
courses that are more theoretical,
Yeah.
where it's like if we're just having a discussion, like as much as, for example, right now we're all going through technology and it's not ideal, we can still have very in-depth discussions despite being in completely different parts of the country.
That's right. That's very good. Those are good elements of technology right there. If I can just comment in the relatively to the cost part as to whether there should be a variation in cost or diminishing in cost.
Yeah, that's definitely a good issue to discuss because I'm personally torn on it.
Right. It's like I think that there's part of the element is that okay, so the the education system has like adapted right now, and I think we're still in the period of time where we must give it time to adapt because it's such an unexpected crisis that we can't realistically expect it right now to say lower cost.
Yeah.
That I fully agree with that.
But yeah, like if we're
is
talking long term,
yeah,
oh, I am 100%. I feel like in general, the education system has been leaning towards a weird direction of late in a lot of places in terms of the costs.
yeah,
But so there's definitely room for savings there. I know one idea that I just want to quickly mention is I think that one easy way that you could kind of start to cope on more of a short term is you could sort of arrange schedules such that maybe the first 2 years you have more offhand courses that you can do online. And then maybe in your upper years, then it's like, okay, well, now we're going to go into stuff that might be more you have to actually be at the university for.
mm,
That way, not only would you be able to, for example, not necessarily go directly to the university, so that could save some people having to get houses in faraway places because they could do the first couple of years digitally, when often people tend to switch programs anyways. And just essentially, I feel like there could be some rearrangements in like how we approach things if we were to continue with more of the distance side. But of course, are we going to continue with it past COVID? That's the other big question. Or are we just going to go back to how things were? There's
Well,
so many interesting ways that we can go forward from here.
I certainly appreciate being able to go to U Ottawa and not have to pay extra rent for a second place in Ottawa on top of Winnipeg. So I'm pretty happy about that. That's quite a bonus to be able to be, you know, anywhere, in the world and to be able to finish my education. So that is a plus.
It's an interesting accessibility thing
It
in
it
terms
is quite
of giving
nice.
people access to things they wouldn't normally have like maybe people in the past would have been like, "Oh, I would go, but I can't afford to live in that city."
Yeah,
For example,
exactly.
because cities, especially nowadays, are becoming more and more expensive.
Right.
Yeah, as far as accessibility is concerned, is the education system is therefore imposing on us less restrictions. Where we talk about the freedom of I'll say the freedom of movement. There, you can study from wherever you want, and you don't have strict obligations as far as that is concerned. You don't have to school, don't have to. Yeah, for example, in this case, you don't have to pay rent. Like I'm all up for that. Like that's good news. Uh, then I think it's just a great stride forward for I think a certain type of individualism that is healthy in that the individual can have more room for his own individual needs and his own individual intellectual pursuits, for example, and he's not crushed by the like say typically a monolithic power that the education system has, and it's almost a situation where the individual gets like crushed or by the movements of say the collective or what is the macro is that's what usually happens with the universal argument. The counter argument is that well the individual there's no such thing as like a universal individual, right? So I think that in that scope, it's an interesting development. It's an interesting development that we can study from anywhere in the world. Now you see, it will start to be interesting. Like how far can we take it in this direction? Can students seemingly start to really choose their own course progression? But now we could start talking about how much credibility would scholarly institution would lose if say all of a sudden you can just decide your like course load and there's not one core respected decorated curriculum and degree that you can get that certifies you're knowledgeable, and that's a very interesting
I just had an interesting idea,
yeah.
kind of relating to your cost discussion that we've been having, as
Mm-hmm.
well as how we're going to continue in the post-COVID world. So let's say next year, let's say starting in September, we're back to normal, right?
Right.
The school now has invested in all this infrastructure for online learning. It has gotten some feedback on what courses work and don't work because it's done a full 1 year cycle
Right.
in the online setting.
Right.
Let's say in the next year, now it can reopen to students going to the university, but offer some courses as being a digital version of the course.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, with recording a lecture of an in-person course, having it done digitally for a cheaper price for only certain courses that are considered basically the equivalent of attending the lecture.
Right. Right.
It would
Right.
be an interesting, like, I think it would be an interesting way of incorporating an optional discounted course without overly dropping the quality in the sense that it's only for certain courses.
Mm.
It would be difficult to fully do, but it's an interesting
Right.
idea of kind of almost having this mixed
It is
digital
very
non-digital.
interesting. It's very interesting, and I think what the whole question. Well, I think there'll be two questions when they're back to normal. Uh, you know, the beginning of the second year, as you call it, the back to normal first year, and then they've had 1 year of experience with the new technology, and then they are to come back to the new normal, and then they have to ask themselves the first question, which is, okay, what do we do? Do we keep the new system? Do we do 50-50? Do we completely stop it? And then, they'll have to ask themselves then, do you have the resources and that in order to be like financially sound to support both systems? And then it's going to become a whole idea of, well, okay, are the students who are doing the course on distance, are they advantaged? um, are they unfairly, like, I don't know, like gaining yeah, a certain advantage over their other students? Does it affect like the grades? Like, I don't know.
Well,
Those are small details, but there's going to be then a greater discussion still on, okay, what have we learned from this experience of going into the COVID-19 like situation, and we adapted into being all on distance Zoom, and we managed to do it.
yeah,
So people basically were able to study from their bedroom, literally in their bed,
yeah,
and they're just basically receiving very sometimes kind of prestigious education. There's further education. This is a university master's. You can just be in your bedroom. What kind of statement does that make? It's like I did my whole semester from my bed. You can probably say that like nowadays. Well, you start to wonder, well, okay, how's our relationship with education changed at all? And now that's going to be very interesting, because now might go back to the normal, but that's not quite sure, because a lot of people say never going back to the normal, and then there's the impending like recession slash depression.
It might
Some,
delegitimize, or make for the classic institutions of the universities that we think of as building institutions. We'll think of universities differently, and maybe online universities that were already there before the pandemic, maybe they were already in a position where they were doing remote learning. So maybe that's where they're going to shine. And regular institution, are people who are going to hire you, are they going to care that your degree says e-learning on it or not, right? Like, a lot of
right,
the time, now more and more it seems that they are so desperate to fill people with qualified positions, that they say, well, as you're qualified, we need somebody now, so you're hired. Because
right,
the e-learning, I think, will be a lot more irrelevant, and it'll be a lot more normalized, as we say. So it's kind of interesting where, and just like Graham was saying, unlike the big institutions that are already there, the big classic universities, they have to pay for all the buildings and the everything,
right.
the infrastructure they already have. So it's gonna be a long transition for them. And just for after the pandemic, everybody started working from home after the lockdowns in Canada and parts of the United States. And this was a big shock for the electrical companies and for the internet. So think of everybody's going to work using the internet at work, but now everybody's using internet at home. So that was a
Yeah,
very big deal for the internet companies, where they had to redouble their efforts and make sure that everybody had working and workable internet
yeah,
in all the suburbs everywhere. So it becomes
yeah,
a huge infrastructural thing, right? Us were very lucky that they were planning to put in new Ethernet, fiber wire in our neighborhood. So we were very lucky that that happened recently. But for a long time, a lot of places, I think, e-learning is not going to be ideal, because when your teacher's breaking up, it's the meme on the internet of your teacher's breaking up, and it's just a bunch of pixels, and you're like, did you understand the course? And you're like, yes. I
yeah,
sometimes it's so difficult, because when you're there, somebody can just ask a question right then and there. And it's amazing how much time it takes to just, oh, we have a question in the classroom. I'm going to turn on your microphone. Hello, are you there? And then
Mm-hmm.
10 minutes later, yes, hello, can you hear me? Yes. Oh, okay, my question is about technicality. And you're like,
Right, right.
we're taking up, half the courses on, these
Eh,
these questions and the technical difficulties, and so it's like it is a lowered quality in education. I absolutely agree.
in that spirit regarding accessibility, Trudeau just last week he promised, quote, connect 98% of Canadians to high-speed internet by 2026. So the needs are definitely recognized there, in terms of transferring to the whole internet, for the workforce demand. It's undeniable.
And so once they have this infrastructure, you might as well just stick to with it. And just like what Graham was saying, you know, everything that can be done remotely, we should, because it's more efficient that way. And then everything that is more practical, or it's just it's impossible to do it otherwise. We have to go take different measures and do it different ways, right? And so, it's interesting,
I
and
find that,
maybe.
yeah, this has really kind of opened our eyes to new possibilities for, I guess, making our lives easier. Because we've all kind of, I think, been forced to take a step back and go, what am I doing all those hours at work, anyways? And it kind of makes you think, like, how much time was I working in that time? Because when you're at home, you end up being like, okay, well, I finished my work for the day. It's 1 o'clock. Normally, I'm at work till 5.
And so people listen to podcasts and play games at their computer, filling up their time, and it's a real big problem in most industry. And it's kind of interesting how that's a big problem, where there's such the formal institution of you work the 9 to 5, and then you're like, all right, I'm done my work, it's 2 p.m., can I leave? And they're like, nope, you can't, you have to do more work. And it's like, well, give me more work. And they're like, well, we don't have any more, so just sit there. And you're like, what this is like, what is this? Well, what kind of rudimentary royal regal system is this, where we just follow tradition just out of necessity? It's like, well, now instead of going to the post office and having to do, I just sent a couple emails and I'm done. So what do you want me to do? Like, it's so, it's kind of a big thing where we've become more and more efficient. So we need to spend less and less time doing a lot of communication, a lot of other kind of you know menial
Well,
work.
I think the bottom line is we've become more and more efficient, but I find that a lot of people, in terms of their work lives, haven't been able to benefit from that efficiency beyond the concept of being laid off because they don't need as many employees anymore.
Right, and that's the very unfortunate thing, where they tell you, if you don't find work, yeah, we're not gonna have you around for very much longer, which is an ironic thing, right? It's like, why, instead of making it so. Well, see, the problem also becomes where people were paid living wages, and then now there's a lot less and less work to be done. So it's technically, people can work less hours for more pay. So it increases quality of life, but for companies, that's not a good. That's not good for the bottom line. So it's kind of a hard situation for them.
Well, the new conditions, and the new acceptance of the internet as a, how to say, legitimate workplace, seemingly, uh, it kind of creates the grounds for there to be a new sprout in entrepreneurship. I mean, if you can just set up office from home, well, speaking of traditions and all that, you could probably imagine a lot of people are thinking that, hey, I don't need to subject myself to the kind of rigorous structure and demands of my employer, by being active for this much time, for this many days of the week. And uh, I think that it's a pretty. I wonder how it's going to play out with neoliberalism, to have this kind of stride forward with entrepreneurship as a culture, how much really are we going to be able to compete with monopolies and the big corporations? Is this going to give more power to say the lower classes? It's going to allow for more fluidity between different classes. Like, are you going to be able to suddenly start making a lot of money, say from just starting your own business, working from home, with now seemingly having all the resources you need to set up a legitimate business, aka the internet. You got the internet, and then you can do something with it. But it's it's to be seen how it's going to play out. I think neoliberalism is very when you start to really kind of crowd the internet with a neoliberal culture, and it's the complete competition between everybody. Um, you know, you can only imagine that perhaps individuals on their own, if they all start to just compete against one another, all being seemingly now little entrepreneurs, like they're kind of like free agent workers, just like plug into the internet and then they start working for whatever function there is. Uh, if they all start to compete against one another, is this just gonna create gridlock, or is this gonna create new organization, for there to be new social kind of structures, and to have more efficient markets, perhaps more local based markets? But I don't know. Does neoliberalism allow for that? That's those are interesting questions.
Yeah, man, it's quite a big topic, and it's a really complicated issue. I mean, to the point where even the experts are not even able to have a really
Mm.
firm grasp on this kind of topic. This is kind of a developing issue, and we're all in for the ride for the most part, I think.
Yeah.
It's been close to an hour and a half here, so I think it'd be a good time to wrap things up for this episode. I really appreciate everybody that came on. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts with us, and
Pleasure as
everybody
always.
watching. I appreciate you. So I'm gonna give Pierre-Paul and Graham a last chance to talk here.
Hey, all right, go ahead, Graham.
I'd just like to point out Dom is silencing the voice of the people by cutting us off.
We'll talk about
Clearly,
neoliberalism next podcast. Don't worry, we're gonna have more
uh,
podcasts.
he is very anti-libertarian, putting it out there right now. Despite me
Of
not
course.
being particularly libertarian myself. But regardless, it's been a fun time. It's always a pleasure talking with you guys.
Hey,
That's
I
great.
can only share the same sentiments. It was very good to get the opportunity to do this with you guys. I talked about how I kind of been wanting to do a podcast for a while, so to finally get the opportunity to sit down and get it done, it has been very pleasurable. We've had interesting discussion, and yeah, as Graham say, we're gonna have to leave next one for neoliberalism. We'll do a bit of research on that, and definitely neoliberalism is like a key, a pivotal element in the picture today. So, hey, that could make for an exciting next episode. So until next time, stay classy, San Diego.
Thank you so much. Okay. Well, that does it for this week's episode. So if you want to catch us on any other social media, it's Conscious Queries Podcast. And we appreciate you watching. And you can see Patreon episodes every week on Tuesdays as well. Thank you so much. Have a good day. Bye bye.